Hi guys, so I'm Steve from DevOps Guys. I was actually given the title of DevOps in the Wild by the guys from Taterloop. So I didn't actually come up with the title. They said, why don't you call it DevOps in the Wild? So the first thing I immediately thought of was having this sort of nerd party kind of DevOps in the wild. But, geez, I don't know about the quality of that picture. So about DevOps Guys, we're basically pretty much the same as Marco's company really, which is basically this concept of having a managed operations and managed service provider. So we work with a lot of companies who, basically don't really want to do operations. They've outsourced their development, or they've got a really strong dev team and they just want to get somebody else to take the pain away and manage it for it. So that's the plug, and we very much believe in building continuous delivery pipelines and stuff like that. So that's me, been doing ops and infrastructure for about 25 years, sort of been there, done that, got the t-shirt to prove it, as you'll see, even if I had to print the t-shirt myself. So, in terms of really what I want to talk about today, some of it's been touched on in the intro and touched on in the, is that better? So I'm getting a thumbs up from the sound. Some of it's on the introduction, but I think I have been doing a lot of work in the last 2 years with open source customers, people who are running LAMP stacks and running Java stacks and this sort of stuff. And there is this constant bashing of Windows, and I just wanted to sort of talk about the gorilla in the room that is, this OS wars. And I've honestly got to say, I am really don't give a shit anymore what operating system you use. And, I just describe myself now as being OS agnostic. And I think this is really interesting because I was having a discussion with somebody the other day, and it comes back to the cloud. I think in about 5 or 10 years, there is going to be an entire generation of systems administrators who have never installed the operating system that they use. Because why would you? I will just download a cloud image and I'll spin it up. I don't need to know how to install Windows anymore. I don't need to know how to install Linux anymore. And that's both good and bad. It's very efficient. I'd argue that maybe if you've never installed the operating system, you might not really understand a lot of the fundamental underlying aspects of it. So maybe that's a bad thing. But I think that as we move forward with cloud workloads, people are going to become agnostic. I'll choose the operating system that supports, my preference, or supports the workload I want to run, supports the language that I want to develop in. So, really don't give a damn anymore about operating systems. I would rather discuss the Bristol poo chart scale than having another conversation around Windows versus Linux. It really just isn't that interesting to me anymore. If you've never seen the Bristol stool chart, it's absolutely fantastic. Okay, so we're not going to get a nice slide build because we're running this on a Mac, but I think the other point I'm trying to make, sorry, so much for all the automation that I had in all my presentations, what the hell. Okay. Yeah, okay. I think one of the key things is here around DevOps. We've all come down to culture, automation, lean metrics, and sharing. Has everybody seen this model before? Familiar with the CALMS model of DevOps? Hands up, yes, no, haven't seen it? Never seen it before? Okay. Pretty well known in the DevOps community as a way to talk about and describe DevOps as an initiative, as a culture, and the different areas and aspects that you need to address in a DevOps initiative. So you need to talk about culture, you need to talk about automation, you need to talk about lean thinking and batch sizes and all those sort of good aspects of lean and Kanban and stuff like that, Kaizen. You need to talk about measurement and metrics and how I'm actually going to demonstrate this improvement. And I need to talk about building this collaborative culture, having collaborative tooling, having chat applications, all those kind of stuff that I might want to actually try and build in the organization. Nothing in there says anything about operating system. Doesn't really care what platform you're running on. It talks about how you do your development, what the relationship between your developments and your operations team are, how they collaborate, how I get my requirements in at one end, and how I actually deliver and ship and manage the software at the other end. It's really only the automation piece in there that actually has really much impact on how you actually, whether you're running on a Windows or a Windows or a Linux platform. So it's just really important to keep that in mind. When you're talking DevOps, just remind yourself, I'm OS agnostic, I don't care. I care about culture, automation, lean metrics and sharing, and doing what's right. That said, let's talk about actually the DevOps in the wild. So we do a lot of work with Windows customers. As I said, my background has predominantly been on Windows, and I've been doing a lot of open source stuff for the last couple of years. We have this idea of a continuous delivery pipeline. I like the point that Boris made in his presentation earlier, that even though this is kind of shown as being a pipeline, there should be a big arrow at the back. It's just that the graphic designer didn't get the revised graphic in time. So you've got the waterfall continuous delivery pipeline. So, I'll blame somewhere back here in the planning stage. So, what are we as a Windows shop who are managing .NET applications, large-scale .NET applications, what are we using? So, are we using TFS? Ooh, no. Sorry, Boris. Sorry, we're just not. We tend to like the Atlassian stack. We like the Atlassian stack. We find it very easy to use. We find it really, really easy to integrate. Got great webhooks. It's nice UI. Supports Agile and Kanban. Works really, really well with source code repository of choice, which is Git and Stash, not TFS. But now you can actually use Git underlying TFS if you want. So if you want some of the other features of TFS, you can use TFS with Git. So I recommend that you explore that. What do we use as our build server of choice? We tend to use TeamCity, mainly because TeamCity has a really good, so we'll come back. We tend to like TeamCity because sometimes it's a little bit easier than Jenkins for newbies, mainly because it's got really, really good support and integration with Octopus Deploy, which is our deployment packaging and deployment tool of choice, which was actually mentioned in your presentation, is now fully supported in Azure. So if you're doing stuff in Azure, in fact, if you're doing stuff in Windows, full stop, just use Octopus Deploy. It's just a no-brainer. SpecFlow, things like that, using Selenium for automation, SpecFlow if you're doing TDD, BDD, I should say. Who actually is using, who's a dev in the room, and who is actually using like a BDD or a TDD or an SBE type approach, and who's using tools like SpecFlow or equivalents? Wow, okay, not a lot.
It's not the Gherkin part now.
Huh?
We just use Selenium WebDriver stuff.
Okay, interesting. Okay, that's very interesting. If I was asking this in an open source environment, I'd probably get a pretty different answer to that. That's just really...
You aggregated the baby and the bathwater together in your question.
Yeah, quite possibly true. What do you have as an artifact repository? Obviously, TeamCity comes with its own, but there are third-party products you can use as an artifact repository. As I said, Octopus Deploy. We love Octopus Deploy. Just got a significant $2 million US dollar investment from Redgate to further develop the product. It's sort of becoming a de facto standard. So if you're not using Octopus Deploy, I strongly recommend that you do. And then in the operate phase, well, again, choose whatever your products would be. Obviously, we use DataLoop.io, it's our monitoring solution. ScriptRock Guardrail, PowerShell DSC. I'll talk a bit more about PowerShell DSC later on. We're starting to do a lot more work with the Redgate tool set. I mean, the poor DBAs tend to be the red-headed stepchild of the DevOps automation movement. Everybody wants to automate the application deployment, but everybody looks at the database bit and goes, oh, databases, I don't want to do it, because it scares the crap out of them. But obviously, Redgate are heavily pushing into this space now, and hence their investment in Octopus Deploy, and they're writing their own database lifecycle management for Windows. So again, very heavily moving into this space. So I'm very conscious how much time I got left. 11 minutes. Okay, cool. I was conscious I had a lot to get through in a short period of time, so I'll probably have time for some questions at the end. Lessons learned from the customers that we've built, that kind of continuous delivery pipeline for. What's consistent things have we learned? Watching them trying to go through DevOps initiatives, trying to support them in going through DevOps initiatives. So, there is no difference, I will tell you that right now, in trying to do a DevOps initiative in Linux and a DevOps initiative in Windows, and anybody who's telling you the opposite is just bullshitting you. I mean, they just do not know what they're talking about, because the number one problem that we have with just about every customer that we deal with who's trying to go through a DevOps initiative is that their requirements are shit. It is not that their automation is crap. It's not that Windows blue screens. It's not that that Active Directory doesn't talk to their Samba box or whatever that's running Linux or blah, 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 blah. Cross-platform, I'm using AWS, I want to migrate to Azure. It's not that. The number one problem that we have is that, the requirements are crap, so the quality of the code you get when the requirements are crap just flows all the way through the pipeline. And the second thing is that two people who are sat opposite a desk for each other don't talk to each other. And no amount of Linux and Windows, Bristol stool chart analysis is going to overcome those problems. It just won't be done. So, the problems are exactly the same. Second sort of major challenge is, and this was sort of touched on, I think, in Boris' stuff about Microsoft's real seismic shift in attitude towards open source and openness. Somebody was even saying that they just can't wait for Microsoft to buy GitHub because Microsoft's got so much stuff on GitHub now that they might as well just buy them. I think this is a challenge, I think, for some of us, who come from a Windows background. We all go and look at Stack Exchange and Stack Overflow and this sort of stuff. But certainly historically, there was probably a little bit more of a not invented here syndrome in the Windows world than there was in an open source world. And I really suggest if you guys are not going out there and looking at the projects that are on GitHub or any of the other sort of shared environments, there is so much shared stuff now. I mean, there is so much shared stuff from Microsoft. There's a number of different projects, the Azure, ASP.NET, Microsoft. There's so much free stuff that you can download. Haven't looked at PowerShell.org and what we're doing with PowerShell DSC and PowerShell.org. One of our guys is actually a director of PowerShell.org, so we're sort of heavily investing and contributing open source stuff back into the PowerShell.org projects for DSC. So I think my message is one of the things that you can take from the open source movement, and I think is a real challenge for all of us, is to get more involved in the open source Windows movement and really start to contribute to that. Lesson learned number 3. PowerShell and DSC is absolutely awesome. Fast forward 5 years, if you're a Windows administrator and you don't know PowerShell, I can't see that you'll have a job anymore. I mean, that's just you can't administer a lot of Microsoft products now without, you do Exchange, it's all, commandlets and stuff like that. There are things that you just can't do via the GUI anymore. Ditto and SQL servers moving the same way. All of the administration, all of the configuration management with PowerShell DSC, again, is all PowerShell. So, moving forward, if you do not have a good familiarity with PowerShell, I really don't see that you're going to be effective as a Windows administrator on the Windows side. The challenge is, as a Windows administrator, and this is also a challenge for people that come from an open source environment that have been doing Bash and Git and all that kind of scripting, is it's not enough to just hack scripts together anymore. You've got to approach your development as a developer, which means that in addition to knowing PowerShell, you need to know how to check stuff in Git. You need to know how to make branches. You need to know how to rebase. You need to know how to do all of those things. And as somebody from an operations background, that's a real challenge. It's a real challenge to bring that development mindset into the way we write operations code. Everything should be in the source code repository. If I want to run into the burning building of my data center, I want to grab the server that has my source code repository on it and run away with that, because that's all I should need to rebuild my entire environment. Well, it should be backed up to the cloud anyway. But, the main point is that everything should be checked into there. This day of having this idea, or the old day of have the guy in the corner who was the PowerShell guru or the scripting guru or the batch file guru, who had all of these batch files that only ever existed on his laptop, is gone. It's got to be seen as a first-class asset, checked into source control, managed by thing, unit testing if the right frameworks are available to do that. I think what's the one for DSC? There is a unit testing framework for DSC, and it just escapes my mind. I can't remember what it's. Pester, that's the one. Thank you. So again, some of this TDD and sort of mindset has to come into the development of these development practices. Part of the essence of DevOps is bringing these development practices over into the operations side. What else do we have? This is actually from the PowerShell book. DSC represents a massive change, and I think the intelligent editing of text files was basically a description which was once applied to Linux administration, because that's all Linux administrators actually seem to do, is just to edit text files and then restart processes. Whereas we run MSI files and restart entire servers. So, okay, maybe Linux has some benefits. You know, the PowerShell DSC stuff. Who is using PowerShell DSC? Yeah. Okay. Who's using Chef or Puppet or in thing? Yeah. Okay. Who thinks Chef and Puppet on Windows really sucks? Good. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. I'm setting you guys up nicely, guys. Come on, work with me here. Jeez. Okay, so there's a lot to be said about PowerShell. There is a lot of really good stuff. We are doing real work with PowerShell DSC in Azure for real clients, configuring real servers. It's not, you know, it's not. We've got 5 minutes, great. It's not, you know, theoretical stuff. It's day-to-day work and using it for clients. So it's very doable. Number 4, who's packaging up all their stuff as NuGet packages? Yeah. Who's using Chocolatey to manage their own laptop? Yeah. Chocolatey. We love Chocolatey because Chocolatey is yum. So for those of you that have a Linux background, you'll get the joke. So, yeah, see? So thank you. Somebody at least. Sorry. Okay, so package management for Windows. Installing stuff in Windows has been shit for 20 years. You know, ever since Windows 3.11, they've tried to have a repo of sorts. You know, you know, add remove programs in Windows and stuff. It's never worked very well. It's always been crap. What we're starting to see now is with you know, with the NuGet specification, wrapping things up as NuGet packages, using tools like Chocolatey, very much the Linux apt-get and yum approach to package management. I think in the new version of Windows there is a much better package management that's all been reinstalled. We'll find out in September or whenever they launch Windows 10. So, you know, again, if you're not looking at NuGet packages, you know, if you're not outputting NuGet packages from your build server, which are then consumed by Octopus Deploy, that are then deployed to your applications, or if you're not installing stuff, you know, using Chocolatey, I mean, it's great, you know, you want to install so many packages, it's a single Chocolatey command, bang, job done. So Chocolatey is just awesome as well. So again, think about the way you manage packages differently, look at the way that packages are managed in Linux and really learn from that. And last but not least, there's an old thing from the alchemists. They used to, a guy named Hermes Trismegistus, I can remember his name, but there's an old saying for the philosophers and the alchemists was, as above, so below. And one of the things that we're finding with a lot of our customers is that their sort of continuous delivery pipeline goes so far, you know, and it sort of tends to be like on-premise, and then maybe they're running their production workloads in the cloud, or they're running some of their dev and test workloads in the cloud, and then it's on-premise. You come back, and at that point in time, their deployment mechanism, their packaging mechanism, their configuration management mechanism changes completely. And they wonder why they have problems with their deployments. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that, you know, try and find a way to make a consistent API and a consistent way of managing, whether that's using an abstraction layer, you know, like Terraform or something like that. There is, I think, there is some support now for in Azure for Terraform. You know, Vagrant, you know, all of these other sort of layers, and Fog if you're in a Linux world. You know, I think the other key thing is now you've got the Azure pack for Windows. Is everybody familiar with the Azure pack for Windows? Okay, so if you're running a Hyper-V environment, it basically gives you Azure APIs, Azure billing, Azure user management, and all of that on-premise. So if you have a target of being an Azure workload, I do not understand why you're not running the Azure pack for Windows, because then if I can manage my on-premise environments in the same way and using the same APIs and the same way I'm going to deploy my applications as I do in the cloud environment, then I've got a consistent pipeline. As above, so below. What's on-premise and what's in the cloud is managed in a consistent way, because we see customers that get themselves in all sorts of problems when they basically, you know, as you go up through the environments from system test, integration test, you know, UAT, et cetera, and then suddenly at the last minute, there is a completely different mechanism to do the releases. So, you know, if you can find an abstraction layer or a a packaged way of doing it, then to give you a consistent pipeline, then I'd strongly recommend that you do that. Yeah, Vagrant Terraform, if you're not familiar with. Who uses Vagrant on a daily basis? Okay, so quite a few people are that. Who's ever heard of Terraform? Yeah. Who has a little sort of shrine to Mitchell Hashimoto from HashiCorp in the corner of their room? Yeah, me too. Guy's just awesome. Yeah, that's it. That was the 5 lessons learned.